prison booty. Booty was more important than food. Booty, a man's butt. It was more, I'm serious. It was more booty, having some booty was more important than drinking water, man. I like booty.
From 2010 to 2014, an average of 5 inmates walked away from the Blackburn Correctional Complex each year. So far in 2015, 7 inmates have walked away from the complex. Right now, a 6-foot wooden fence is the only thing separating the inmates from freedom.
Yesterday evening, the prison had been on lockdown since Tuesday when a fight broke out between inmates here. Yesterday evening, the warden reportedly told prisoners that they'd have to continue being supervised instead of roaming the ground freely as they're accustomed to doing. And officials say that's when the inmates started setting fires all over the property, breaking windows, and running amok all over the site.
A former employee at a prison in Oldham County is accused of having an inappropriate relationship with a convicted. Kenya Wade is charged with a misdemeanor of official misconduct. She worked as a social service clinician at the Kentucky State Reformatory.
According to the U.S. Attorney's Office, officers Randall Dennis and James Benish assaulted an inmate who was lying face down while wearing handcuffs and leg shackles at the Eastern Kentucky Correctional Complex.
Kentucky's prisons have long been pressure cookers of violence, where desperation and brutality meet behind concrete and steel. Historic uprisings and modern scandals alike have carved these facilities into the state's dark memory.
But when lockup visited Kentucky State Penitentiary, we met Fleece Johnson, a longtime inmate who practices a very different kind of homosexuality.
But we have sexual desires, right? So you got a bunch of men locked up in one place. All of them get hard. All of them's horny. All of them got sexual desires. So what are they going to do? You won't let them have a woman. They gonna have each of somebody's gonna have to give us some booty. And it's just that simple.
A group of inmates attack a guard at the Kentucky State Penitentiary. It happened around 8:45 Christmas morning at the prison in Eddyville. Investigators say 5 inmates orchestrated a gang attack on a correctional officer with a weapon in a common area.
Known as the Castle on the Cumberland, the Kentucky State Penitentiary in Eddyville has housed the state's most dangerous convicts for over a century. Its rugged stone walls rise above the Cumberland River like a fortress, but inside, the history is written in blood. One of KSP's darkest chapters came in 1923, when Monty Tech Walters and 2 accomplices seized a shirt factory room, tied up the lone guard, and made a desperate dash for the main gate. Gunfire exploded through the prison grounds as Walters' gang deleted 3 officers, including Hodge Cunningham, in a running battle through the kitchen and mess hall. By nightfall, all 3 convicts were dead, and the prison had earned its violent reputation. This was a place where desperate men would literally fight to the death to escape. That deadly legacy lingers. On June 17, 1988, 8 inmates, 3 of them on death row, pieced together a homemade ladder, scaled the walls, and slipped past guard towers. Their brief taste of freedom ended quickly, but the escape exposed alarming security gaps. More recently, the danger has turned inward. In December 2022, 5 prisoners armed with improvised weapons launched a coordinated gang attack on a housing unit, ambushing a correctional officer. The officer survived, but the assault showed that even prison staff are never truly safe inside KSP. Today, Kentucky's oldest and only Supermax remains as volatile as ever, a place where the ghosts of past shootouts echo alongside the everyday threat of inmate violence.
Former Eastern Kentucky Correctional Complex sergeant was convicted on federal charges yesterday. A federal grand jury convicted Sergeant Eric Nantel in a brutal abuse and cover-up that happened at the Eastern Kentucky Correctional Complex in July of 2018. Evidence showed that Nantel watched lower-ranking officers assault a non-violent inmate who was lying face down in a shower cell wearing handcuffs and leg shackles. When the abuse was reported by the inmate, Nantel and others tried to hide the incident. 6 others previously pleaded guilty for their roles in the assault and cover-up. 3 testified for the government at trial.
At least 24 staff members at Eastern Kentucky Correctional Complex were investigated. 3 of them no longer work there, and 1 other was suspended. Officers told inmates they would throw out positive drug tests if they agreed to be tased.
They tased the shit out of them.
3 correctional officers at EKCC were fired, and a 4th was suspended last June for tasing inmates who failed drug tests or not reporting the incidents.
My arm smelled like burnt skin all night with scabs on me.
Tucked deep in the hills of eastern Kentucky, the Eastern Kentucky Correctional Complex in West Liberty has built a grim reputation not for inmate-on-inmate violence, but for brutality by those sworn to uphold the law. In July 2018, shocking video emerged showing Eastern Kentucky Correctional Complex correctional officers savagely beating a fully restrained prisoner inside a shower cell. The man handcuffed, shackled, and face down posed no threat. Yet guards punched, kicked, and struck him repeatedly as he lay helpless. Federal prosecutors later described the attack as a conspiracy to punish the inmate for nothing more than failing to comply. 6 former officers were convicted and sent to prison for violating his civil rights, with court records detailing how they took turns swinging batons while another officer pinned the man to the ground. The scandal didn't end there. Whistleblowers, lawsuits, and federal filings have painted the Eastern Kentucky Correctional Complex as a place where excessive force is common. Tasers are abused, and vulnerable inmates, particularly those with mental illness, have reported sexual assaults by staff. For many inside, the guards are as feared as the cell blocks themselves. As one federal prosecutor bluntly warned, Eastern Kentucky Correctional Complex has become a sacrifice zone of the justice system, a prison where power is unchecked, and those in uniform can be as dangerous as the men behind bars.
Now, new at 6, an inmate escapes from the Kentucky State Reformatory in Grange, but it isn't until a sheriff's deputy sees him about a mile away that the prison even learned that he had escaped. The Wave troubleshooters have learned Alexander Maldonado escaped the prison without prison staff noticing. Maldonado was seen walking around a creek nearby wearing a t-shirt and khakis, holding his inmate shirt. He claimed that he was being illegally detained.
A former employee at a prison in Oldham County is accused of having an inappropriate relationship with a convicted. Kenya Wade is charged with a misdemeanor of official misconduct. She worked as a social service clinician at the Kentucky State Reformatory. An internal investigation uncovered sexual phone calls that she made to Cedric Thompson. He is serving a 70-year sentence for attacking and raping women at apartment complexes in Linden.
Headlights flashed outside the Kentucky State Reformatory as the Department of Corrections emergency response team made their way into the state's 2nd largest prison. The Department of Corrections says while a nurse was working, an inmate pulled a homemade shank on her and took her hostage. You can see people moving inside the prison as officers worked to get the nurse out safely. The Department of Corrections says Carver was taken to Baptist Health in Grange. Kentucky State Police say Carver died around 7:25 Tuesday night, 3 hours after taking the nurse hostage. The Department of Corrections says the nurse, who works at Correct Care Solutions, was not injured and is doing okay.
The state's largest prison, holding more than 2,000 inmates, has been scarred by tragedy and turmoil. In January 2013, mentally ill prisoner Stephen McStoots died after being forcibly removed from his cell and strapped face down in 5-point restraints on a mattress. Surveillance video captured the harrowing moments as McStoots went limp and stopped breathing. His family later sued, arguing that guards used an outdated and inappropriate restraint method that caused his suffocation. The coroner ruled the death undetermined, but outside reviews faulted Kentucky's training and restraint policies. One veteran defense attorney noted that officers in the footage looked untrained and not prepared to handle a mental health crisis, a stark warning of how security procedures can overshadow inmate care. A decade later, Kentucky State Reformatory again drew national attention. On New Year's Eve 2023, inmate David Carver took a prison nurse hostage with a homemade knife. After hours of tense negotiations, an emergency response team stormed the cell. When Carver lunged, troopers opened fire, deleting him instantly. It was one of the first hostage situations in the prison's history. From suffocations to standoffs, Kentucky State Reformatory's record reveals how quickly order can collapse inside overcrowded, underfunded facilities. Here, a single agitated prisoner, whether in crisis or intent on violence, can turn an ordinary shift into a fight for survival.
Flames shot high into the air at the Northpoint Training Center in central Kentucky Friday night as inmates there rioted and set fires before they were subdued by officers in riot gear. Authorities say 6 buildings were destroyed in the melee and 4 prisoners remain hospitalized. 700 inmates of the medium security facility were relocated to other prisons across the state, while the 500 inmates who are still there are being compliant. That's according to state authorities. Officials haven't detailed what triggered the disturbance, but they say it began Friday evening when prisoners set fire to trash cans and other items. They say it took about 2 hours to get the inmates under control, and a total of 8 staffers and 8 inmates were injured.
New tonight, a Kentucky corrections officer is behind bars accused of selling drugs to inmates. Early this morning, state police were called to assist in an investigation at the Northpoint Training Center in Danville. Correctional Officer Chad Chiaro was suspected of bringing into the facility in exchange for money.
Built on the grounds of a former psychiatric hospital, Northpoint Training Center holds roughly 1,000 medium security inmates in dormitories clustered around a central courtyard. But in August 2009, frustration inside the prison erupted into one of Kentucky's most notorious uprisings. What began as a peaceful inmate sit-in spiraled out of control. Prisoners trashed the dining hall, set fires, and within minutes 6 buildings, including the kitchen, canteen, medical unit, and 2 housing dorms were ablaze. It took more than 2 hours and outside reinforcements for officers to restore order. 8 guards and 8 inmates were hurt, with 4 prisoners requiring hospitalization. The damage was catastrophic. $10.8 million in losses, and hundreds of inmates shipped off to other facilities. State legislators later traced the riot to chronic overcrowding and miserable conditions. Testimony revealed inmates routinely ate moldy food, lived among vermin, and endured crumbling infrastructure. Guards and families echoed the complaints, saying tension had been building for years. Though Northpoint is not a maximum security prison, the 2009 revolt was the largest in Kentucky in decades. Its rural setting, once thought to shield the facility from scrutiny, instead allowed problems to fester until anger finally ignited. Today, Northpoint remains synonymous with the fires that exposed a prison ready to explode.
Their time on the run didn't last long. Police have arrested 2 inmates they say walked away from the Blackburn Correctional Complex in Lexington. Jordan Green and Waltez Franklin were reported missing from the prison around 8 last night. But this afternoon, police say they tracked them down near the Harrison-Grant County.
For the second time in the last 8 days, police are looking for an escapee from the Blackburn Correctional Complex in Lexington.
From 2010 to 2014, an average of 5 inmates walked away from the Blackburn Correctional Complex each year. So far in 2015, 7 inmates have walked away from the complex. Now a 6-foot wooden fence is the only thing separating the inmates from freedom. The Department of Corrections says Canada was serving a 15-year sentence for convictions of robbery and wanton endangerment out of McCreary County.
I think if he has a history of it, he's done it before, why wouldn't he do it again?
We're looking for the latest inmate to escape from the minimum security state prison in Lexington. We have a picture of him, 41-year-old Lewis Stokes. He was doing 37 years for receiving stolen property in Henderson County.
Inmates who escaped from a Lexington prison were found this afternoon. They say these 2 men, Michael Reynolds, who's from Russellville, and Jonathan Mullins, first went missing last night. The men were serving time at the Blackburn Correctional Complex. KSP says prison staff told them they couldn't find the 2 inmates around 9 last night. Troopers have not shared how the men escaped.
for it and got away from a Lexington prison overnight. A guard at Blackburn Correctional Complex on Spur Road chased after the inmate but couldn't find him. Lexington police were soon called in, as were search dogs. They're looking for 25-year-old Russell Curtis.
New tonight, both inmates that escaped from Lexington's Blackburn Correctional Facility last week are now in custody. According to Kentucky State Police, 40-year-old Bradley Cornwell was arrested earlier this afternoon and is being held in the Burgin County Detention Center. 38-year-old Adam Ball was arrested on Friday and is being held in the Fayette County Detention Center.
Blackburn is classified as a minimum security men's prison, but its history suggests otherwise. Spread across 300 acres and featuring barrack-style housing and 2 working farms, Blackburn rarely houses death row inmates, but that hasn't kept trouble away. Escape attempts over the years have stirred unease among nearby residents. In one recent incident from July 2025, inmates simply walked away from a job site on a Saturday evening. A multi-county man found them the next day, but not before they'd spent nearly 24 hours on the run. Local memories of earlier escapes, like Charles Blanton's 1995 flight to Florida, along with occasional inmate violence, including stabbings, continue to fuel community concern. Some offenders reportedly view the facility's low security measures as a challenge, adding tension even to routine patrols. Officials now admit that growing complacency around security has eroded public trust. Blackburn's reputation as a low-risk institution is being tested, one walkaway at a time.
Deputies noticed that 40-year-old Lestia Shreves of Cecilia, Kentucky was missing around 9 o'clock last night. Shreves was serving time for a probation violation for a felony offense. She violated probation for her charges of first-degree possession of a controlled substance, distribution of methamphetamine, and burglary. This is the vehicle law enforcement believes Shreves might be driving. Around 9:12 last night, Kentucky State Police received a report of a stolen vehicle from a residence near the Western Kentucky Correctional Complex.
Once promoted as a work farm, Western Kentucky Correctional Complex sits quietly among the soybean fields of Lyon County. The facility includes both minimum and medium security units, where inmates tend orchards and gardens under staff supervision. But this seemingly peaceful setting was shattered in May 1986, when a brutal deletion exposed the hidden dangers of even the most pastoral prison programs. That spring, corrections officer was supervising a planting crew when inmate Elton Ray Taylor suddenly attacked. Armed with a hammer, Taylor beat officer Cash to death inside a barn. He then dragged the body outside and fled the prison grounds in a stolen van. Though captured hours later, Taylor's crime remains one of the most vicious on-duty murders in Kentucky's corrections history. The incident revealed the risks behind the facility's open layout and low security work details. Taylor had shown no signs of violence that day until he struck. Today, Western Kentucky's calm landscape masks a darker legacy. Staff remain alert, especially during work assignments away from secure perimeters. The 1986 deletion, memorialized in law enforcement records, continues to serve as a sobering reminder. Even in the most rural corners of the prison system, violence can erupt without warning. Located just east of Louisville, Luther Luckett Correctional Complex has housed medium and minimum security inmates since it opened in 1981. Straddling Jefferson and Oldham counties, it often serves as an overflow facility for nearby urban jails. But over the years, it has struggled with chronic overcrowding, at times operating at nearly double its intended capacity. Former staff recall working 60-hour weeks as inmate numbers far exceeded the available space. That kind of pressure can quickly turn volatile. In one recent case, a gang assault inside the prison ended in a fatality, with multiple inmates later indicted for the deletion. Critics argue the danger isn't just incidental, it's systemic. When dorms and cells are packed beyond their limits and staffing is stretched thin, even minor conflicts can escalate into deadly confrontations. Today, Many in the corrections system consider Luther Luckett among the state's more dangerous prisons, not because of its design, but because of persistent crowding and strained resources. Tucked in the forested ridges of eastern Kentucky, the Lee Adjustment Center is a 600-bed, medium-security prison operated by the private company CoreCivic. Normally quiet, the facility erupted into chaos in mid-September 2004 during one of the most destructive prison riots in the state's history. On the morning of September 14th, inmates launched a coordinated uprising, setting fire to multiple buildings. According to Appalachian News and Firehouse.com, 2 dormitories and the administrative office were ignited almost simultaneously. Firefighters and corrections staff were unable to contain the blaze, as flames consumed structures and thick smoke blanketed the compound. Witnesses recalled scenes of charred mattresses, collapsing ceilings, and inmates being rushed to safety. By the time the smoke cleared, 6 buildings had been destroyed and hundreds of inmates had to be evacuated. Later investigations pointed to long-standing tensions over crowding, understaffing, and general dissatisfaction with conditions as contributing factors behind the revolt. The dramatic images of black smoke rising over the hills turned the once obscure Lee Adjustment Center into a symbol of how quickly order can collapse. To this day, the 2004 riot stands as a stark chapter in Kentucky's correctional history. From the stone-walled fortress at Eddyville to the rural work camps of Fredonia, Kentucky's prison system has repeatedly shown how deeply a correctional system can fail both those it confines and those it employs. Each of the institutions mentioned above earned its dangerous reputation not by chance, but through repeated tragedy, whether a historic shootout, a catastrophic riot, or the quieter, ongoing brutality behind prison walls. Chronic understaffing and severe overcrowding run through these stories like a fault line. Retired corrections officers have warned for years that these aren't isolated incidents, they're systemic failures. At times, staffing at Kentucky State Penitentiary dropped to just half of what was needed to operate safely. Investigators also found Luther Luckett Correctional Complex housing double the number of inmates it was designed for. Until Kentucky confronts these root issues, its prisons will remain volatile facilities on the brink. The evidence is etched in the scars left behind. Burned out buildings, broken bodies, and lives forever altered. These are not just incidents, they are warnings. Whether the state chooses to learn from these grim chapters remains to be seen. But real reform will require more than patchwork fixes. Only by investing in staffing, infrastructure, and oversight can Kentucky hope to transform these so-called hellholes into places of true rehabilitation rather than neglect and death.